Shadow Generations might look like a complete package, but what if I told you the game is hiding entire voice lines, test stages, leftover Frontiers mechanics, and scrapped ARK layouts, and even early versions of levels that completely redefine how we see Shadow's campaign? Today, we're going to dive into every piece of unused content buried inside Shadow Generations, from the cut dialogue to abandoned abilities and to the full-on prototype stages that Sega never intended us to see. And at the very end, we're going to talk about how this cut content actually hints at what Frontiers 2 on Unreal Engine 5 could look like. Yes, before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe, but that's only if you like me as a person. Let's hop right into this. So we'll start with the simple stuff. Shadow actually had extra boss victory lines recorded, but they never actually made it into the final game. These weren't tiny throwaway lines either, as they were meant to emphasize Shadow's attitude, his confidence, and his connection to the original stories of the Shadow lore. First off, Shadow has a line where he says,
"I am the true ultimate life form."
Now this is a huge nod to BioLizard because obviously he was the original candidate for the ultimate life form before Gerald created Shadow. So this was meant for after the BioLizard boss. One for Metal Overlord was,
"If that's all you've got, you're no match for Sonic, much less me."
And a final line,
"The ultimate power has already been perfected."
This was for Devil Doom, as since everything has been matching the final line that did make it into the game. So yeah, Shadow was originally a lot more vocal. Section 2 of this video goes over the early test text that reveals Sega's internal build. So the voice lines were cool, but this next part will show us even more telling, early development text used in the playtest builds, as these chunks of text reveal how unfinished some areas were behind the scenes. One line describes the Doom surf ability, and it literally tells the player that Shadow can move freely on water, but certain areas are inaccessible because they are still under development, so the testers literally played a white void where chunks of the world didn't exist yet. Subsequently, Sega planned for this Act 2 to tease the new ability, which, before we go into Section 3, I want to go over two Metal Overlord lines. "You're no match for me, I've become the true Sonic, the ultimate life form." And the second one was, "At my speed, rubble might fly your way. Try not to get hit." These were never recorded, so likely these were just storyboard visions. Then there's also some very random, very boring sounding tutorial leftovers, nothing crazy, but we do get a weird Steam-rich present value that says, "Exploring Kronos Island." Now, this is not just the Frontiers Island, this is a leftover from the Frontiers code, but this brings up the biggest part of this video. Section 3 discusses how Shadow Generations has a ton of Frontiers leftovers, and oh boy, there is so much here. Now, since Shadow Generations runs on the same underlying framework as Frontiers, it inherited a bunch of Sonic's moves. These obviously include the drop dash, the lightspeed dash, the spin dash, the stomp, the bounce, and the wall climb, and other Sonic moves that were inherited from Frontiers that we don't talk about. Now, obviously, as we were transitioning towards a merger between Generations and Shadow Gens, we also had a couple of issues, as the spin dash has the old slow version of the pre-update 2 of Frontiers, the lightspeed dash exists but is missing the button to activate it, the drop dash is insanely slow unless you use speed values, and also the bounce works but has zero sound effect. Another thing is that the wall climb does work, but it has really weird janky physics if used on the wrong surface. Then there are also parameters for moves like drift, cloud jump, parry, and dodge, and none of these appear in Shadow Generations, and honestly, it makes sense. Shadow Generations is a much more traditional level-based game, and yes, it does have some of the open zone elements, but it's not as hyper-focused as Frontiers. It gets deeper than this though, because Frontiers objects also remain in the code, like climb over walls, pulley objects, a hit drift disabling triggers, and a golden stage completion trigger. Even the Frontiers skyboxes and the presets of atmospheres work in Shadow's open world, which obviously makes sense since they're running on the same engine. The unused stages of Shadow Generations has 2 points. Firstly, that there was development-only test levels, and second, that there was early versions of existing stages. And in the game's master stage listing, a ton of dev stages exist in name only. No playable data. In the files there was also a beta version of Space Colony ARK Act 1, and there was a couple of things to highlight. The level originally started way closer to the Ark instead of the intro cutscene. Parts of the terrain were missing or different, and certain platforms and enemy placements were entirely absent. For the game, the Warp Skyscraper is incredible, but is one of the best openings to any Shadow stage ever. But in the beta version, it was much longer, and it was cut down for pacing and reused as in Radical Highway Act 1. And that unused Ark variant, it still appears, but it's a backdrop in the cutscene where Sonic and Shadow fight over the Chaos Emerald, so the assets didn't go to waste. Now, what does this unused content mean for Frontiers 2? Shadow Generations is built on the bones of Frontiers. Everything left over, from the Kronos debug strings to the unused physics, this shows that Sega's prototyping mechanics were internal across all of the projects. So what does this tell us about Frontiers 2? 3 major things. Number 1, Sega is experimenting aggressively with shared frameworks. The leftover abilities show there are unifying movement systems, and expect Sonic and Shadow to share more refined physics in Frontiers 2, especially utilizing the brand new Unreal Engine 5. The second is that level streaming and world building are evolving, as the unused ARK level variations prove that Sega tests many versions of the stage before picking the final one, and the Unreal Engine 5's Nanite and Lumen would supercharge this process and make development a lot more efficient, which, as Izuka exemplified, was to make more rich and expansive worlds and level design that felt a lot more intricately crafted with Sonic. And this new technology helps them to be able to craft a game that feels not only cohesive, but also makes it a lot more Sonic-ified, not just sticking Sonic in a random realistic world and not having the elements. Now I want to go on a tangent before we get onto the third point, but I actually love the graphics in Frontiers. I think they're amazing, but I feel like if they were to just go with the more Sonic-y environment, like ramps and loop-the-loops and corkscrews, that's what's going to make Sonic truly stand out, no matter what art style he's in. Now, maybe not go back to the Lost World art style, but I love Frontiers' art style. Number 3, and this is about abilities of Sonic. Now, obviously, we know that the skill tree is going to return since they're going to be using an open zone format, but if we talk about the Doom Surf-style mechanics, they could evolve into traversal gimmicks that they could implement for Frontiers 2, and this would make getting around the open world a lot more convenient. As if Shadow's abilities were still being tested during the generation's development, imagine Sonic's kit evolving in Unreal Engine 5. And remember those cutscenes that they were testing using Unreal Engine 5 and the Maya animation test? If they were testing cutscenes, what else could they be testing? Frontiers 2 could absolutely include longer building slides, more extreme terrain deformations, physics-based set pieces, more open-ended platforming, and faster high-speed sections that Unreal Engine 5 can render seamlessly. Also, since more Sega employees are becoming ever so more qualified and their respective salaries are increasing, we could definitely be seeing Frontiers 2 to having a much more AAA experience, and this is really exciting to see, because not only that, but Unreal Engine 5, like, I'm not trying to throw any shade to Hedgehog Engine 2, that engine is absolutely beautiful. The fact that Sega left so much material in Shadow Gens shows just how experimentable they're becoming, and Unreal Engine 5 will even push them further. This cut content from Shadow Generations also could foreshadow Frontiers 2 with 4 more key points, as there could be a more ambitious open visual fidelity, as Unreal Engine 5 geo-streaming tech allows for massive, highly detailed environments without massive performance hits, so definitely it could be left on the Switch too, and the test data from Shadow Generations could hint that Sega may build more rich and denser worlds within Frontiers 2. My second point is about dynamic lighting, weather control, and environmental effects that react in real time, as Unreal Engine 5 has real-life global illumination and reflections, and lighting can shift dynamically with day and night cycles as we've seen in Frontiers, but obviously with more dynamic weather changes, which could bring far more immersion and making traversal and exploration feel alive, rather than just static. Another third point that I want to make is that seamless world streaming with minimal load engines is very central to Unreal Engine 5's mechanics. It has something called world partition and large world streaming, which allows the system to develop large gigantic maps broken into the streamlined chunks, which means Frontiers 2 could deliver an open zone environment with multiple zones, or one massive open world, which I feel like Sega will most likely go for. Unreal Engine 5 will also deliver fast loading screens that will be rare or non-existent, which immerses us into the next-gen experience. And finally, there's more flexibility for Sega developers, which means there will be more experimental mechanics, levels, and features, and developing for the skill tree will be much more expansive, which pretty much confirms that the skill tree is going to be huge compared to Frontiers 1, which I know is a pretty obvious point to make already, but it's just a nice little subtle confirmation from the engine's capabilities themselves. Sega's going in a bold direction, and I love all of this. Like and subscribe if you like me as a person, and remember that Frontiers 2 is going to be incredible. That's every single piece of cut and unused content currently discovered inside Shadow Generations, and as Frontiers 2 gets closer, expect a lot more connections between these games to surface. Thanks for watching.